Welcome back to the program, you beautiful people. My name is Dr. Dan. I am a pharmacist turned obesity expert. And today we're moving away from the drugs a little bit and we're going to dish a little bit on the psychology side of things when it comes to managing our weight. In particular, I want to talk about choices. And if you've been hanging out on social media like I have for a little while, you've probably seen a theme come out in that obesity is a choice. Even the individuals that have obesity and may or may not have lost weight at this point in time will sometimes say obesity is a choice. People who have obesity choose to be fat. It is ultimately these individuals' choices to get the double Big Mac and fries instead of a salad. And so, based on that logic, what we get is that people who have obesity just need to choose to eat less and move more. That's it. Problem solved. So why haven't you put down your fork and gone for a walk yet? I mean, other than the fact that you love watching my YouTube videos. Oh wait, maybe you actually have made some choices and you have perhaps tried to eat less and move more, but yet you are still struggling with your weight. So what gives? Perhaps there is a little bit more to this whole idea of choices, and that is what we're going to dive into today. So let's get into it. Now, before we dive into it, the usual housekeeping, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below to, further boost my self-esteem and make me feel good at the end of the day. But also check me out on my other channels at the official Dr. Dan. You can also check out my website, healthevolved.co. And hey, don't forget to tune in here on YouTube where I will be doing a live every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So it's a common belief that humans are logical and rational beings, and that with conscious effort, human beings will make the best choices, or at least the choices that are in the best interest of the meat sack that is carrying our conscious around and making sure it stays alive and maintains its overall well-being. And psychologists fortunately have a name for this idea, and it's called the rational choice theory. So the rational choice theory postulates that individuals will basically weigh the pros and cons of every single decision that is put forth before them, and they will then choose and make the decision to go in a certain direction that is going to be in the best interests of them. Basically, the theory says that essentially we all make pros and con lists in our head of all the various decisions that we have in a day-to-day, and ultimately we make the most rational and logical choice based on that pros and cons list in order to best benefit us, the being itself. I mean, it seems logical, it seems simple enough, and I'm sure you, like myself, at some point has believed that you are indeed control of every single one of your choices. And based on the internet's logic, it seems that individuals that have obesity may do the opposite. So clearly, an individual that is consciously eating more and moving less, despite there being adverse potential consequences, they must clearly want to be in that state. So my question is, well, what about people who smoke? What about people who drive race cars? What about people who do work out in the shop without safety glasses? Or what about every single one of us who has decided to continue hanging out with that toxic ex even though they are destroying our mental health? I mean, sure, the sex might have been great, but 5 years of therapy later, and we are still ultimately unpacking that mess of a relationship. Things really are just not making any sense, especially since we are the most evolved and advanced species on the planet. And our logic and reasoning abilities are far superior than any other animal on the planet, but yet it seems that our family dog will make better day-to-day choices than you or I. I mean, if we just look at dogs, they chose to become domesticated so that humans could choose to feed them, take care of them, and pick up their crap every single day. You wanna talk about rational logic if I've ever seen it? Anywho, hopefully you see now that the rational choice theory might have a hole or two in it, and we all may or may not just be idiots. And so, to further drive this point home, I want to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a great guy named Elliot. Elliot, by all accounts, was a decent, well-rounded individual. He had a good job, he had a family, a couple of kids, and he generally was pretty well liked. However, one day, Elliot ultimately started experiencing some crippling headaches. And after trying a few remedies and taking some time off work, Elliot ultimately went to the doctor, where it was discovered that he had about a baseball-sized tumor in his brain. Well, right there, right in the front part of your head there, seems to be the problem. That's at least what I think the physician that was reviewing Elliot's scans with him might have said. Anyways, Elliot was then promptly scheduled for surgery and had that baseball-sized tumor removed. The surgery was a success. Elliot was sent on his way and to continue living his life just like he had been before. However, something about Elliot had changed. You see, Elliot still had full control of his faculties, he was still relatively charming, and he was still able to converse like normal with everybody in his life. However, his home and work life ultimately started to fall apart. You see, Elliot was leaving a number of projects unfinished, he was skipping client meetings, and he was having a heck of a time with just the simplest decisions, such as choosing whether to write with a blue or black colored pen, or where he should go for lunch that day. And initially, people cut him some slack. I mean, the guy had a frickin' tumor taken out of his skull. And people would cover for him and make up excuses, but unfortunately the patterns continued and ultimately people just weren't able to cover for Elliot anymore. And after he lost the company a significant amount of money, he was ultimately let go. And at home, things really weren't much better. Elliot would skip his kids' Little League games to watch TV. He would go days without speaking to or acknowledging his wife. And he would go to the grocery store to pick up tomatoes, only to come back hours later not having anything in hand because he couldn't choose which tomato to bring home. He would fight with his wife, but I don't think we could really call it a fight because he really was not actively participating because he was not registering what the fight was even about. And as you probably guessed, Elliot eventually got divorced. From here, Elliot remarried, he got scammed by the woman and divorced again. He sunk a whole bunch of money into a business that was also kind of a Ponzi scheme scam thing. And effectively, he essentially lost all of his savings and ultimately became homeless. And it seems this once very successful family man essentially destroyed his entire life in the blink of an eye. Fortunately, Elliot's brother took him in, gave him somewhere to live, and started taking Elliot to various doctors. And after the doctors did their doctor things, what they found was that Elliot's IQ was actually above average. He didn't have any mood disorders or cognitive distortions or anything like that. In fact, everything checked out physically as well, and by all accounts, Elliot seemed perfectly normal. Except for one thing. He was unable to complete even his most mundane daily tasks. And finally, at this point, Elliot was referred to a neurologist called Dr. Antonio Damasio. And Damasio, like all the other doctors, ran the same tests and found the same results. There was one exception with what Damasio ultimately did, though. He decided to just simply sit down and talk with Elliot. And Damasio described some of his findings as such. Elliot emerged as a man with normal intellect who was unable to decide properly, especially when the decision involved personal or social matters. He was always controlled, always describing scenes as a dispassionate, uninvolved spectator. Nowhere was there a sense of his suffering, even though he was the protagonist. I never saw a tinge of emotion in my many hours of conversation with him. No sadness, no impatience, no frustration. Essentially, Elliot was an emotional black hole, and was unable to make any kinds of decisions. This was when Damasio made the realization that everybody was focused on Elliot's intellect, but that ultimately wasn't the problem. So to confirm his hypothesis, what Damasio ultimately did is he printed off a whole bunch of grotesque and gruesome photos of car accident scenes and victims and various other things of that nature, and showed them to Elliot. And what he tried to do was try to see if these pictures ultimately triggered some kind of emotional response in Elliot. And ultimately, when presented with these photos, Elliot didn't react. He didn't have any kind of response whatsoever. Effectively, he felt nothing. And even Elliot noted how effed up it was that he was experiencing no emotional response, and that prior to his brain tumor, he for sure would have had some kind of response to these photos. And so Damasio concluded, we might summarize Elliot's predicament as to know but not to feel. You see, in losing his ability to feel, Elliot lost his ability to assign meaning to the world around him, and in particular to his day-to-day choices. You see, to him, watching paint dry evoked the same level of emotional response as watching one of his kids graduate from high school. And as you can imagine, this was kind of an unexpected finding. For like millennia, people have thought of our emotions as this nuisance, something that needs to be controlled, suppressed, and removed from the equation so that our logical and reasoning brain can ultimately make the choice that is in our best interest. I mean, there's whole philosophical camps and religious leaders who have talked about, the importance of becoming devoid of emotions, with the ultimate goal of becoming a logical and reasoning badass because, yeah, your emotions aren't running the show. You are making a decision and a choice purely based on your logic and rational thought. Basically, we wouldn't have any more silly emotions telling us to get a dog because the dog will be cute and it'll actually be fun to pick up their poop. Anyways, Elliot and many other patients that Damasio ultimately worked with disproved this idea that we could just be devoid of emotions and use nothing but logic and reasoning. Elliot essentially achieved what philosophers and religious leaders have been trying to work towards for centuries. And ultimately, when that brain tumor was removed, he didn't become the ultimate unstoppable badass that only makes rational and logical choices. He actually became quite the opposite. He turned his whole life into a metaphorical dumpster fire. Now, what we know from Elliot's story and further research in this area is that a brain that can't feel ultimately can't make up its mind. You see, emotions, they drive our choices. And emotions tend to be very complex. The emotions that you and I experience on a day-to-day basis are going to be influenced by our environment, our genetics, our past traumas, what we had to eat that day. All of these things are going to play a role in the emotions that you feel and how those emotions ultimately dictate and drive your choices. Hence the fact that two people can witness the exact same event or experience the exact same event and have two entirely different emotional responses to that said event. Similarly, when two individuals are presented with a series of choices, and now that we know that emotions are primarily driven by emotions, which are affected by all the other things we already listed off, we know that those two individuals are likely going to make slightly different choices. Now, when it comes to the individuals that have obesity, they are known to have experienced things like childhood trauma, discrimination, genetic differences, physiological differences, emotional dysregulation patterns. I mean, the list goes on and on that an individual with obesity might ultimately have. And all of these things are going to play a role in the emotions that someone with obesity might experience. And thereby, their emotions that they experience and that they have are going to have an effect on their choices. And no, none of this means that all hope is lost and that you'll be forever a slave to your emotions and be forever struggling with obesity. We can learn to regulate our emotions and to ultimately learn how to make better choices. And part of doing this is aligning our emotions and our feelings in the same direction as our logical and reasoning brains want us to go. It takes a lot of effing work and really should be done in a team environment with a group of healthcare professionals who can best support you and it may or may not involve the use of medications to help you overcome those barriers little by little. But all of that is ultimately for another video on another day. For now, that brown coil that your lovely, cute little dog left for you in the backyard is calling your name, and I know you cannot wait to go and pick it up. Until next time, you beautiful people, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and check me out on my other channels at The Official Dr. Dan. And of course, check out my website, healthevolved.co, O as in orange, to book a free consultation with myself and see if you can get some additional support on your weight management journey. Until next time, everybody, always remember, small tweaks lead to massive peaks.